Hello everyone, this is Dr. Todd May from philosophyq.com. Today we're taking a practical turn and looking at how to write a philosophy essay. This video is intended for undergraduate students, but it's a great refresher for anyone who spends their time writing argumentative style analyses or essays for their job or just as their pastime, blogging on the internet. So let's get started. Here's the outline for the video. We're going to look at the basic idea of a philosophy essay, some things to bear in mind before you get writing, what's entailed in research, and then we're going to look at an example of an introductory paragraph for a philosophy essay. And as I discuss, it's one of the most important things on the way to writing a great philosophy essay. Okay, bear in mind you have several aims to meet when writing a philosophy essay. Basically, these are things you're going to have to demonstrate to the person who's going to be marking or grading your essay. So let's run through those very quickly. The first is that you have to provide an answer to the essay question that demonstrates an understanding of the key concepts related to the question. Now, some of the key concepts will actually be mentioned in the essay question, but also it's a part of your research to determine what other concepts are essential into explaining and arguing an answer to the essay question. And we'll see an example at the very end of this video. You have to demonstrate knowledge of the field related to the question. So that again entails doing research and citing specific sources as you support your points or bring to the attention of the reader, the marker, certain things that they ought to bear in mind when considering the essay question. You need to use proper referencing style, footnotes, or inline text. You need to use correct grammar and syntax, and you also need to use stylistic language, that is, rhetorical expressions or phrases, which help make your argument and analysis flow better. And finally, you want to argue from the start. This is a big one because a lot of students are very hesitant to argue from the start, and that's because writing is a process and they haven't honed their ideas. So they start off with something that may be sitting on the fence or it's a bit wishy-washy or even vague, but make sure that when you're drafting and redrafting your introduction, the argument is quite clearly stated up front. You don't want to arrive at the argument at the end of the essay. That's a big no-no for philosophy essays. But what we're going to cover in this video are a few tips to help you to get that argument right up there, up in front. Before you get writing, there's just a few things to bear in mind. One is that in selecting your essay question, you want to choose one that genuinely interests you, because if you do, you'll be invested in the question. And even though it might be difficult or might be not be totally familiar terrain, you'll have the energy and the motivation to dig into those research materials and try to find the right sources to help you answer the essay question. There is one thing I have to caution against, and a lot of students tend to choose essay questions that they've worked on before, usually at secondary school or high school, and they kind of just regurgitate that essay thinking, well, I did well on this in high school, so it ought to do okay at the university or college level. And that often is not the case. What is expected at university level is a much more rigorous and in-depth analysis and argument of an essay topic. And a lot of times at high school and college level, the idea of arguing about something may not be the goal of an essay that you write. It might be looking for some other aspect of essay writing. So you want to make sure that to avoid that completely and to actually expand your boundaries, you want to look at a new essay question that really interests you. And that's going to be one of the key ingredients to make sure you have the motivation and the endurance to last through the process of writing a philosophy essay. Research. Two things to note. There are primary sources and there are secondary sources. And primary sources are the texts written by the philosopher or philosophers in question that are part of answering the essay question. So in this case, we're looking at the essay question, do you find Aristotle's conception of happiness compelling? And it's a kind of question you'll encounter in an ethics class that takes Aristotle's notion of virtue ethics seriously, or it might find a question like this arising in an ancient Greek philosophy class. So in this case, the text written by Aristotle would be the Nicomachean Ethics, and perhaps I might look at his Politics and Metaphysics. And secondary sources are academic commentary relevant to the topic. And these can appear in academic journals and books. Now, it's important to realize that blogs written by academics are not the same thing. What's involved in academic publication by presses and journals is a vetting process to make sure that the content is up to speed. So it's been reviewed by the author's peers who are more or less specialists in that particular field. So it's gone through quite a rigorous process. So make sure you stick to the bona fide academic sources in journals and books. You'll probably be looking at a few introductory books just to supplement your knowledge. That's great, fine, but don't rely on those introductory books to write your philosophy essay. You want to make sure you look into a selection of advanced books and journal articles that deal specifically with the essay topic in question, that really hone in some specificity, detail, and rigor about what's going on, in this case, with Aristotle's conception of happiness. Now, let's pretend that I've done my research, and from this research, I've determined 3 points I want to say in addressing the question. And I'm going to agree that Aristotle's conception of happiness is compelling. And what I found in my research is that key to this compellingness is that Aristotle makes a distinction about happiness as an action. And this contrasts greatly with the idea that happiness today is a psychological mood or state. So for Aristotle, that's not on the cards. For Aristotle, happiness arises directly as an action or from an action. And then I'm going to look at how happiness enlists virtues. So in doing the action of being happy, we're also enlisting certain virtues. And because we enlist certain virtues, that becomes a process of practicing happiness. So it's a very active notion of happiness instead of a passive one, which tends to be what the modern one is about. So I'm going to thresh out all those kinds of details as I begin the writing process, but those are the 3 topics I'm going to center on as a result of my research. Okay, that was a lot I just covered, and it was very short, admittedly. I'm trying to keep this video as succinct as possible. So if you want any more detail, you can always book a coaching session with me via the website, philosophy2u.com, and there's a specific category for undergraduate students. The fee is not too much, and I think you'll get a lot from it, whether we're discussing essays in general or specific topic that you have in mind. Finally, let's get started with an example. So we're going to bear in mind the same question about Aristotle and happiness, and I'm going to draft an introduction just to get started. And I might even draft this introduction before I do my research if I have enough knowledge of the topic, or as I do my research. And the reason for doing that is if I actually set down in writing what I think the answer is to the question, it gives me a point of reference to refer to. I might go back and confirm that after research, or I might decide that I slightly got it wrong or entirely wrong, and I can redraft the introduction accordingly. But just getting pen to paper or tapping on the keyboard and filling up a blank document in Word is a way to give you a frame of reference, a beginning from which you can develop your own ideas and arguments. So always remember that writing is a process of thinking things out, so you have to begin with drafts and redrafting as you go along. So what is an introduction? Well, it's more than just a hello, my name is, or that is introducing yourself or the topic. You're not just going to describe certain things about the essay question or the topic that you might essentially find on Wikipedia. The general rule of thumb I give to students is if you find it on Wikipedia, that information tends to be something you don't want to include in an essay introduction, such as Aristotle was an ancient Greek philosopher who lived from this period to this period and wrote certain texts. What you want your introductory paragraph to do is introduce your argument or your answer to the essay question. And that argument and answer is going to be 1 to 2 sentences long, as we'll see. Another way to think about your introduction, remember I said that philosophy essays are about argumentation all the way down. You start with an argument, you support and justify it, and you want to convince the reader, that is the person marking or grading your essay, that your answer is, if not right, at least convincing and rational. So that's the idea. So your introductory paragraph is going to present your essay in a snapshot or a miniature. Why? Because it's going to introduce the importance of the topic or the question. It's going to state your answer or argument, and it's going to indicate the 3 ideas or topics you think are essential into supporting your answer to the essay question. So let's look at the introduction in a little bit more detail. I'm going to break it down into 3 parts. So the first one, if you look here, is context, or basically stating what the importance of the question is. Again, no Wikipedia stuff, as a general historical introduction. Then next will be my thesis or argument, which is the answer to the essay question in 1 to 2 sentences. And then we're going to look at the indication of key topics or points that I will discuss that are going to support my answer to the essay question. So here's an example. And what I've done is I've coded in blue the different parts of the essay, or the different parts of the introductory paragraph. So context, thesis, and then key topics. So the first part in blue is going to be the context. I'm going to try and explain the importance of the essay question. So I'll just read this aloud. And the context is simply that when thinking about living an ethical life, the idea that happiness might be a key component of such a life might strike one as odd, even contradictory. This is because the ethical life generally involves doing what is right despite personal desires, while being happy tends to involve satisfying these personal desires. What is interesting about Aristotle's conception of happiness is that it is central to the ethical life. And furthermore, that an ethical life is actually the happiest of all lives. So hopefully from that, you get an idea of why the question I'm answering is important. And I've provided some philosophical context as to the things that are involved in trying to answer this essay question. It's simply that if we say that happiness is part of an ethical life, we have to really come to terms with the way in which our own personal desires might manifest in this ethical happy life. And the idea that Aristotle's answer or conception of happiness is compelling is going to provide some elucidation of that tension. Okay, looking at the argument or thesis, which is essentially the answer to the essay question. So let's just look at this in perspective. The question is, once again, do you find Aristotle's conception of happiness compelling? And here's my answer. In this essay, I argue that this strong tie between ethics and happiness makes Aristotle's account both appealing and compelling, since it provides a way for us to see how being ethical is also being happy. So that's it in a nutshell. I've been able to state my answer in one sentence, and you don't want to spend more than 2 sentences doing so, because it can mean that you don't have your ideas as concisely worded as you possibly can. And of course, another idea about writing philosophy essays is to be as concise as possible. Okay, so there's my thesis or argument. And the final bit is to indicate what key topics or ideas I'm going to be looking at. So key distinctions that I will discuss: how happiness is an action, as opposed to how we tend to regard it today as a subjective state or mood, how happiness relies on virtues, and how happiness involves a constant activation or practice of virtues. So basically, those 3 topics are going to comprise the body of the essay. I'll provide my critical analysis. I'll be quoting from the primary sources of Aristotle. I'll be using secondary sources to back up things I'm trying to show or indicate. I might even show how sources agree with my view, and I might even show how sources disagree with me, but then how I might respond to those disagreements. That's all involved under the phrase or Jesus critical analysis. So it's a form of justification or justifying my answers and my reasoning. I want to note one last thing, is that the key distinctions that I've noted, the 3 topics, again, those are the key concepts I've determined that are fundamental to answering the essay question. There's not one set list for an essay question, but certainly there's going to be some overlap between different approaches to how you might answer the essay question. One last bit is to note an example of what not to do. So I'll try to cover this really briefly, and I won't read this paragraph out loud. You can pause the video and read it for yourself, but just read it and ask yourself what might be wrong with it. And after you've taken a few seconds, here's what I have to say. So what's wrong with it is, first, it doesn't state an argument. It begins with basic information instead of a context that shows the importance of the essay question. It begins with Wikipedia information, general historical information about Aristotle. And then it basically, instead of stating an argument, simply restates the question. And in restating the question, it states the obvious. And the obvious is it's explaining what I'm supposed to be doing in the essay. You don't have to explain what you're going to be doing in the essay, just do it. And by just doing it, you would be providing an answer to the essay question and indicating the key concepts you will be elaborating upon. Okay, once again, I know that's a lot. Please visit my website, philosophy2u.com, for other resources, or check the YouTube channel for more resources on how to write philosophy essays and do other interesting things. And as always, you can go to the website and book a coaching session with me And under the coaching session, you will find a specific category for undergraduate students. Don't be shy, reach out, contact me. I have a lot to offer, a lot of years of experience working with students and being a successful academic. And I'm bringing it all to the public. And if you like this video, please don't forget to subscribe, share, and spread the word. Thanks. Have a good day.